The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and art. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they'd been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and joining us on today's African American Legends is Kinshasha Holman Conwill, Project Director of the Cultural Blueprint for New York City, and Patricia Cruz, who is the Director of the Aaron Davis Center at City College of New York. Glad to have you with us today to talk about this exciting topic of African American art. So, Kinshasha, I want to start with you by asking, what is the present state of African American art in this country, in this city, in this area?
I think it's terrific. It's very creative. It's very vibrant. There are African American artists who are working in long-standing traditions as well as in the cutting edge, the most recent kinds of cultural expression. So that you have wonderful artists with national reputations like Bill T. Jones working in New York City, in places like Pat's own Aaron Davis Hall. You have somewhat younger writers like the poet Tracy Morris, who not only writes but also teaches. And you've got also wonderful young people. Maybe Pat later will tell you about a great group of young people who work out of Aaron Davis Hall in a program called Impact. So across the spectrum, there's great vibrancy and extraordinary talent in African American communities around the country, and New York City is continuing in its role as an incubator and showcase for talent that either comes right out of New York, comes to New York as a magnet for that expression. And then there also are some areas where some work needs to be done to make sure that the infrastructure to support those artists is made even stronger.
You see, New York City has art museums, they have classes, they have dance troupes, they have theater groups, and in some ways the African Americans are the energy source behind this. Much of what happens in the larger theatrical artistic community seems to be imitative of what begins in the African American community, which then raises the question, is one of those, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich questions. Why don't we get more financial support for the African American art community?
I think it's a complicated question, and I think that there's surely some areas where it's lack of information. That there are wonderful corners throughout New York City, throughout New York State and the country where wonderful work is being done, and it's maybe not being done in the center of the midtown business district of the particular town. So in a place like New York, it could be in Harlem, where there's just a tremendous history and tradition and ongoing cultural expression. It could be at a place like The Point in the Bronx. It could be at the Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning in Queens. So one of the problems is that some of the supporters of art need to get out more. They need to get out of the centers where they have been hovering and move forward. So unlike the very belated appreciation of jazz, the original American classical music, which they have now finally understood is just integral to the story of America, the supporters of culture in general need to know that it's being done in places that may not be on the beaten track for them, but that the real aficionados of culture always find.
Well, how do you seek that out?
Well,
how do you seek out this culture? I walk the streets and I go to the East Village and Soho and so on, and I see galleries and I see theater companies, but I'm attuned to that, I'm interested in that. But for somebody who really doesn't know where to go, they know there's Broadway, and they know there's a little off-Broadway, but they don't know about these beautiful galleries. They know MoMA, and they know the Met, and they know Studio Museum, but they don't know some of these other things. How do they find out about that?
Well, and Pat would have some thoughts on this too, I'm sure, but I think part of what people do more and more now is they go online. They go to some of the websites within their own cities, but if you just go to any search engine, Yahoo or Metacrawler or GoTo.com, any of those things, AOL.com, any of those places, and start putting in things like African American, Black, or culture, you will find it. But also, Pat is part of an exciting program in Harlem where they've actually found a way to focus people's attention by coming together as a group so that a whole group of cultural organizations will be identified. Because you're right, it's hard if you don't already know to know where to go.
You know, I think there's a new Harlem Renaissance developing.
Yeah.
And I know with the Empowerment Zone and some of the other groups, they brought the various Harlem collaboratives together. Now let's look at this a little bit. Now, the Harlem Renaissance back in the 20s and early 30s was really generated by white money and white philanthropists who picked certain artists and nurtured them. The new Harlem Renaissance comes from the Harlem community itself. Now, tell us a little about that, Pat.
I think what's important, and you're right that it does mark a real difference, is that actually approximately 2 years ago, 9 organizations in Harlem got together realizing that we needed to be able to make ourselves more accessible and better known to a larger community. So it addresses the question that you raised, how do you find out about us? We call that the Harlem Strategic Cultural Collaborative, and it includes organizations like the Apollo, the Studio Museum in Harlem, Aaron Davis Hall, of course, the Schomburg Center, Dance Theater of Harlem, Boys Choir. So we all together, all 9 organizations, have come together to put out marketing tools that let people know where we are and what we do. For example, we've just published our 3rd magazine, which shows the kind of programming that we do over a period, and that's the magazine. And one of the things is that we can look at each one of the institutions, what their programs are for approximately a quarter. It also, for a quarter period, the magazine is free actually, but for a 4-month period. And what is also available in this magazine is actually a map of Harlem and of the organizations and where they are placed. So I think that it allows people to know how they might get to our places as well as what programming they might see when they come there. And we have other plans. We're talking about making buses available, like a culture bus, that will allow people to get on and get off at any of the 9 institutions so that they might partake of the offerings there. Because I think that there's really a two-way street. There's the one that says, how do people from outside of the Harlem community know about the diversity of the arts that are being created there, that are being nurtured there, that are being developed and presented? And there is also the street that allows our artists, the artists who are working in this community, to go out into the world and to be better seen, so that there's not a marginalization of those artists. I think that is one of the things that did happen during the Renaissance, where you had people like Duke Ellington who could leave Harlem, go into the world, and represent Harlem at the same time. And one of the things that we see with people like Bill and Bill T. Jones, who's been in a 3-year residency with Aaron Davis Hall, is that he's also a part of the world. So that whether he goes to Lyon in France or Milwaukee here in the States, he's seen on a national and international level. And I think that that right now is a fairly anomalous circumstance. And what we want to see is more and more of the artists who are emerging out of these communities, who have developed their skills and their talents, to be able to be seen in a larger world. And I think that the recognition of their humanity, the recognition of their talents, is something that can then generate the additional support that we're saying is required, both for the infrastructure of the organizations and for the artist organizations themselves.
Well, so much of the art of the Black Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, etc., in the 60s, 70s, even 80s was protest-oriented, anger, acting out. As I go to plays and go to galleries and so on, I see a number of other themes emerging. Yeah. What are some of the themes that are emerging now, Kinshasha? What are some of the themes that are emerging among these new artists in their dance and their visual art and so on?
Well, I think that when you look, whether it's in the visual arts or in the performing arts, you see kind of broad interest in identity and in playing with notions of identity. So some of it may hearken to a particular notion of what a black identity may be, but some of it may be to challenge that very notion. So you see, artists who do work that talks about how the traditional ways black people were viewed are not the way to look at black people anymore. The Harlem Renaissance, going back to your touchstone, was a signal moment in American history where fairly recently emancipated people, like a generation or so after emancipation, were really defining who they were. Well, I think in another way, 21st century African American artists are doing that. But as Pat has said, they're doing that in a world context. So whether it's the younger artists like Savion Glover, who is kind of combining the tap traditions of people like Gregory and Maurice Hines with some of the hip hop culture, there is this hybridity that goes on that these artists are not afraid to embrace. You'll find a dance company like Alvin Ailey, which has this extraordinary repertory that Mr. Ailey developed many years ago with signature pieces like Revelations.
Right.
But then looking at using younger choreographers and the kind of magnificent job that Judy Jamison has done to carry on Mr. Ailey's tradition. And so you see newer choreographers like Ronald K. Brown. You see single choreographers like Blondell Cummings and B.B. Miller. Again, all folks who've kind of found a place within African American organizations as well as in larger ones. And so, the underpinnings of almost all of those artists too have a direct root back to some moment when they got support. Sometimes it was a home, like Aaron Davis Hall, where they could show. Sometimes it was a fellowship. The project that I'm working on, A Cultural Blueprint for New York City, is housed at the New York Foundation for the Arts. Well, that is an organization that gives the most in fellowships across every discipline to artists. Many of those artists have been African Americans, and that has been an important way that the artist can create his or her work, and it keeps those artists in connection with each other and with what is the kind of latest thing happening in the rest of the world.
So you are both art historians, curators, motivators, etc. But for the average citizen, what is the role of art in a society? Pat?
Easy question.
Yeah. Well, for me, it is the communication that transcends language and that allows you to interpret the world, whether you're looking at it from an historical point of view or one that is straight on looking at your own kind of present moment, and in some instances to predict and to give us a sense of where we're headed. So I think that in many ways it is, for me, one of the languages that allows us to traverse what would be differences, so that we can break out of the pre-established boundaries or stereotypes and attempt to define that world in the language of that particular artistic discipline. So whether it's dance or music, and I find that it is a language that can be understood on a global basis, so that it allows you to move across those boundaries.
I think so too. And when you look at some group like Dance Theater of Harlem appearing internationally, it doesn't matter if people can speak English. It doesn't matter if they know where Harlem is even. But the artistry translates across the continents, or the genius of a Max Roach or an Ornette Coleman or Miles Davis. I mean, that transcends any kind of barriers of language. And I think also when you look at communities like Harlem or Bed-Stuy or the South Bronx or any communities really, art also and culture plays the role of nurturing the soul. And that is what is so important.
But suppose the soul is tortured.
It's even more important.
As it is in so many communities. Does art have, I know it does, but what role does art have as a political message? What political message does it send? For example, we have now art involving a lot of nudity. We have art involving symbols against the religions and so on. And one religion gets mad at another religion because they have indulge in blasphemy. Does art have a real political role, or is that just a residue of the expression of the individual?
I think that the artist's role, in one of the interviews for the Blueprint process, we asked artists what their role was, and one artist said it's to be an artist, and I think that's an absolutely wonderful answer. And so I think it's the role of an artist like Renee Cox, who had a difference of opinion with some leaders of the city of New York and some leaders of the Catholic Church, but not with every Catholic and not with every New Yorker. But that notion that the artist's role is to help us think and to help us see in a different way. But also the role, I think, of organizations like PATS and many others around is to be a mediator, not to mean to get people to not fight, but to be a place where people can talk about art. And I think one of the most exciting things about the series they did with Bill T. Jones was not only his fabulous dancing, but the chance of the artist and the audience to exchange. And I think that is so important and happens so rarely. You also did it with Deirdre Murray when there was a work in progress that was being shown. And I think those breaking down of the walls between the audience and the artist, and let the artist speak for him or herself, and not have everyone else putting words into that artist's mouth, I think is important.
Well, as you know, at one time I was related to the Negro Ensemble Company, and some of the things we would do is after the performance, we'd have the audiences sit and talk with the actors about it. It was very interesting because sometimes the audience would be angry with an actor or an actress, and then to see how they interacted. And at one time it was said that our black plays were too angry, and then someone said they had too much profanity in them. Where do we stand now? I know the key black playwright now is August Wilson, and he's got stuff on Broadway and done a lot of interesting things. It stimulates a lot of conversation. People say, is that the way we were? Is that the way we are? How does art, whether it's visual or performing art or jazz, how does art tell us where we are, who we are? Pat?
Well, I think a part of it is through the expression of the individual. And that, you see, for me, what happens is we've gotten, as a society, more and more passive. And when you talk about one of the roles of the artist and the arts, I think it is to provoke analysis, and that through that analysis and through that thinking, you can also provoke action. Because it's very different from when you are in your own house at your computer screen interacting with you know, the screen and the information that is there. I think the experience that you had at the NEC is one that we certainly do at Aaron Davis Hall with the artists that we present, and I know that in each of the other organizations, whether it's 651 in Brooklyn or at NJPAC, across the board, there is an opportunity that is provided with the audience to interact with the artist. And I think wherever that interaction is allowed, that we know more about thinking processes, we understand more about ourselves as thinking individuals, and can connect more around that. Because I think without it somehow, we're going to get more and more disconnected and less able to understand the society that we're a part of and to be a part of it finally. So for me, that's one of the most critical roles that the arts can play, and I think has historically played.
This is great. We talked about the role of it and how it develops, but what about the African American community? Does the African American community really participate in this? Does it accept it? What about it? Because so much of African American art goes somewhere else, and other people are viewing us. Where or how can we get more people from our community involved in interacting in our arts?
I think that one of the things we need to do is also start with the younger people. There's been a great infusion of arts and education in New York City, and it's terrific. It needs to be extended. In the conversations we had as part of our research for the Blueprint Project, that was one of the most important things mentioned by everyone. And we find also that parents across the spectrum, no matter what their means, whether they're wealthy or middle class, working class, want their children to have an education in art because it does all the things Pat talked about. It helps them understand their world. It helps them understand their humanity. And while we shouldn't just do it because it helps them do well in other subjects, it does that too. And the need for young people to understand everything from August Wilson and King Hedley to Shakespeare and Langston Hughes and
Zora Neale
Hurston, as well as as I don't know, Milton and Chaucer and Gwen Brooks and everyone, and that starts in schools. And so I think there's a direct connection for our community to the public schools, because that's where by and large our children still attend. So you build those audiences at the cradle and on through, but also you build citizens who then can support culture. And I think that if you look at the audiences of any of the 9 organizations in the HSCC, you'll see very large numbers of African Americans who come to that, because they're stalwarts of the community. When you talk about NEC, I think of people like Barbara Rantier at National Black Theater, who in terms of the Black theater movement, along with people like Woody King and Douglas Turner Ward, is just pivotal to that existence. Or places like Jazzmobile, where David Bailey and Dr. Billy Taylor just made sure that jazz was kind of just second nature to people. So I think that some of those benefits are being reaped of the investment of time and talent of these organizations, and in a way, when our art goes out to other venues, it helps people return to their own.
That was what I was thinking about when this idea of getting these arts organizations came together. Part of it was to get people to come to Harlem. It was a tourism attraction. Is it working? Are people from other communities, not necessarily other white communities, but other black communities, etc., are they coming to Harlem to participate in the boys' choir or dance theater of Harlem or Aaron Davis?
In increasing numbers, they are. And I think it is a real show of the efforts that have been put forth over the years. Because many of these organizations have been in existence now, all of us over 25 years, and some as many as 60. So we've been in existence, and there is a kind of core constituency that these organizations have and hold and share. And in that process, we're also attracting new audiences, depending upon what is being presented, certainly, and we get people in the hall that have never been there before for each and every instance. And I think that to your question about the educational role and our communities participating in places that, I think one institution that we didn't talk about yet, the Harlem School for the Arts, which is instrumental in training young people in a variety of disciplines, primarily music, but across the board in the kinds of music that they play. In that educational process, they're also engaging parents and the community. So I think that there really is, there are 2 things that are being developed and cultivated. The audiences that are right there in this community, whether they are young or senior citizens, and people who are now, because of the kind of confluence of circumstances, certainly with the economic revitalization that is going on in Harlem, as well as the stabilizing effect of these arts organizations, more and more people are feeling comfortable to come up and partake of these offerings.
Well, what about the churches? The church is the main organizing vehicle in the African American community. What about the church? Sometimes the churches are sort of at odds with the artists and so on. What are you folks doing to reach out to the churches and get them involved in this process? Kinshasha?
Well, I think the church groups are enormously important, and I know in Harlem a church like Abyssinian Baptist Church and also their development arm, the Development Corporation, have just embraced culture in general, and in everything from the celebration of it to even in a very poignant way when we lose our cultural leaders, the mourning of those leaders at a place like Abyssinian is a kind of witness to the role that culture has played in community.
But there are 500 other churches.
Only 500? Well, I think what we need to do is get those buses that go to the Beacon Theater to see all these wonderful plays on what we used to call back in the day, the Chitlin Circuit, to get, because those come from churches not just in New York City, but from around the tri-state area and beyond. We need to get all those folks up to Harlem.
How are you going to do that?
To the Studio Museum and to Ed Davis Hall.
Yeah, actually, we've done special programs so that, and I know all of our constituent groups have as well, where we reach out through the church bulletins, sending materials to the churches, offering special discounts and group ticket sales to congregations so that they can feel comfortable. We even did a piece by Opera Ebony, did a presentation at the hall, and what we did was a special offer for tea and talk so that church groups could come in before the performance, talk to the directors of Opera Ebony, then see the performance and gather with them afterwards, so that there was that kind of activity. And then with our Bill T. Jones program, what we did, and it was specifically with Abyssinian, but we're trying to make that same outreach to a number of other entities, but it was the idea of joining the idea of the arts and faith. And we had a conversation between Bill T. Jones and Reverend Butts. And it was incredible, the church members who came to that. And more recently, Reverend Butts was willing to participate in a dance. And this was a part of how you engage the whole community. In a dance that Bill T. Jones created called the Table Project, which was directly using two groups, young women, ages 6 through 11, and middle-aged black men and men of our community who participated in the same choreography. So Reverend Butts, not Reverend Butts, but there were other people.
Terry Lane, Howard Dotson
were a part of that community dance. But we attempt to engage as participants the people within the community so that they feel a part of it. I know Kinshasha had spoken earlier, and I just wanted to say this, that we have a group of young people, approximately 100, and some 60 of them are there every Saturday with Impact Repertory Theater that is a part working with Boza Rivers.
I can see the incitement and the enthusiasm that you two
we
have
can talk
for
forever
arts in the community.
About arts in the
we
community.
want to thank Kinshasha, Conwill, and Pat Cruz for being with us today and talking about African American art and its excitement in New York City. Thank you for being with us.
Thank
you.